In today's video, we're taking a look at some NHL trade rumors focusing on the Boston Bruins, Vancouver Canucks, Toronto Maple Leafs, and the Buffalo Sabres. We also have a quick update from the NHL waiver wire, and that's coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, today we're taking a look at some NHL trade rumors on 4 NHL teams. But first, quick update from the NHL waiver wire. Brendan Gooley of the Anaheim Ducks, who was placed on NHL waivers yesterday, did in fact clear. No claims were put in, so he will remain a member of the Anaheim Ducks organization and give them the flexibility to reassign him to a different part of their roster, whether it be the taxi squad or the American Hockey League. And there were no new additional waivers news today, so no other players are on the waiver wire that we have to pay attention to for tomorrow. So we'll see going forward. I'm sure there'll be more in the not too distant future. Now, of course, there's plenty of other hockey news today as well. This is our third video of the day on the channel. If you didn't get a chance to check out the other news, of course, late last night into the early morning here, we had the Calgary Flames announce that they had fired Jeff Ward and replaced him with Daryl Sutter. So I'll link that video on the Calgary Flames coaching change up in the YouTube cards. And there was also some news around Brent Seabrook retiring. Brett Pesce was fined. And unfortunately, the Hockey World lost a great man, Walter Gretzky. And I'll link that video up here in the YouTube cards as well. You can check out all my thoughts and opinions on that news. But now let's jump into the trade rumors for today. We're going to focus on 4 teams. Now, first up, I want to take a look at the Canucks and the Bruins. And not only the 2 teams looking for some change, but they very well might be making some changes together. Now, of course, the Bruins, I do have a couple different spots here I want to take a look at, but it looks as though the Bruins, as I mentioned a number of weeks back, there was some talk that the Bruins did have interest in Jake Virtanen. Obviously, the contract, like many teams, for that second year especially, is a little bit of a problem, so they're concerned over what they have to pay him next year if they make that acquisition. But one thing that seems to be the common trend here with the Bruins is it looks as though they're looking for probably 2 moves ahead of the NHL trade deadline. They'd like to upgrade the top 6 forwards if they can and add an extra scoring winger who can be more consistent. And they'd also like a left shot defenseman to increase their depth given what they lost this past offseason and due to the injuries they've sustained so far this year. Now, of course, Jake Virtanen hasn't exactly been, Mr. Consistency, so I'm not really sure that he's going to be the issue to solve their problems here, but it's something that they've been taking a long look at. Now, of course, Tanner Pearson enters the mix as well as a pending UFA. Jim Benning did say today they did have interest in re-signing him, so that they will commence conversations around what that contract extension could look like, and if it's deemed that it's likely not going to happen or going to be too expensive or too problematic, then obviously if it's not looking like he's going to get signed, they're going to trade him. I don't think Benning's going to let another guy end up leaving for nothing here in the NHL offseason. That happened way too much last year, and they've really paid the price and set the team back drastically heading into this year. But obviously with guys like Virtanen and Pearson that the Bruins are eyeing, there is some talk as well that Jake DeBrusk's name is out there and could very well be involved in a trade to upgrade the forwards. I mean, Jake DeBrusk is a decent hockey player, but as we know, he's been very inconsistent, and really this year hasn't been all that great. The consistency issues continue to plague him. Hasn't scored much this year. Shooting percentage is ridiculously low, and it looks as though his time in Boston could be coming to a slow burn here. I mean, it's possible that the management team is kind of running out of patience. I think it's fair to say we've seen this with other young players in the Bruins organization in the past, and it very well could be again. Now, I'm not really sure a trade with Vancouver might be the best possible scenario here. There is also word that the Kyle Palmieri of New Jersey, if he were to become available, that might be somebody else that they are kind of having a look at as well. So the Bruins and the Canucks, like I said, there's talks that go way back here. Of course, they were both linked to Oliver Ekman-Larsson this past offseason, and there was a lot of, speculation that one of the two were going to land him, given the fact that those were the 2 teams that OEL had named as potential guys he would waive as no trade for, and obviously never worked out. I mean, but they've been linked ever since in potential other deals. So I don't know if Virtanen is really the answer in Boston. You get Virtanen and you have DeBrusk. Both players are guys that have been plagued by inconsistency, but personally, if I had to pick, I'd probably take DeBrusk over Virtanen, but still, it is a possible scenario that we could see unfold where they swap inconsistent, struggling wingers for a change of scenery to see if the change will be beneficial for both. I wouldn't be surprised if there were other pieces involved here. If that indeed did happen, like I said, Tanner Pearson could be involved. We could have a guy like Anders Bjork involved as well. Those are all names that have been linked to both sides at some point here in the last number of weeks. So different reports out there, including Boston Hockey Now, are indicating that those conversations are indeed being kicked around. And even if DeBrusk doesn't go to Vancouver, and even if Virtanen doesn't go to Boston, it is very, very likely that both those young players do find themselves with a change of scenery in the not too distant future. I think Virtanen's a little bit more likely than DeBrusk, but at this point, I'd say the odds of DeBrusk getting moved are pretty good as well. It may not happen right away. That's something that could possibly wait until the offseason, where Boston is in a better position for the playoffs than Vancouver is right now. But Boston's definitely going to be adding here ahead of the deadline. I think that's probably fair to say. One concern some have, though, over Boston's ability to add as well, is even though they do have some space that they can do that with, is the grant from ownership to increase the payroll anymore, obviously. So we'll have to see how that goes. But another player that the Bruins are looking at, if it's not Oliver Ekman-Larsson trade being revisited, which is a possibility, but I don't think we're going to see that during the season at all. That's probably pretty unlikely, especially where he has full control. I would think that's something he would probably only want to entertain in the offseason, if at all. But the Bruins apparently do have interest in one of his teammates, another left shot defenseman on a much cheaper, shorter contract, and that's Alex Goligoski. I mean, clearly the left side of their blue line is something that they'd like to add a veteran defenseman on and really bolster that side here. Clearly that's something that's concerned heading into the playoffs. And there's other guys out there, like I said before, guys like Matthias Ekholm are out there as well, but they also have to factor in expansion draft implications, where some guys like Ekholm have contracts beyond the current season, and it could really change their expansion draft plans and make something more attractive available on their roster than they would prefer. So we'll have to wait and see how this goes, but Goligoski could be a shorter-term solution for Boston for the current year rather than go after a guy like Ekholm, but it is something that they're taking a look at. I mean, the Coyotes would have to retain some salary, but that's something that's not unusual at the NHL deadline on expiring contracts. So those are two teams that we're probably going to see some activity on, both heading in different directions between Boston and Vancouver, and we'll see what ends up getting done. Now, when it comes to the Sabres and the Maple Leafs here, now the link here is Taylor Hall. Now, of course, we had immediate availability today from GM Kevin Adams, and Ralph Kruger spoke as well. Clearly, this team is really in a bad position. It's an absolute mess in Buffalo. I read an article today through The Athletic where they talked to a bunch of anonymous former players, mostly captains of the team, and they were all very, very concerned about the state of the franchise and where things are at, and their ability to really move forward now. One thing that was addressed, though, in the media availability is the fact that Jack Eichel has not requested a trade as of right now. I mean, clearly, I know we've talked about Eichel a lot being a trade target, and I still think that there's a good possibility, especially by the offseason or by the deadline, even if he hasn't requested it, teams are going to be calling because they see the Sabres. They know they're a mess. They know they need to make some trades. And obviously, he's a guy that many teams would love to have. So I have no doubt there will be phone calls made to inquire. Whether or not they even entertain it right now, I don't know. But if it gets to the point here by the offseason that he does want to trade, they're not going to have any choice. And if there's more changes aren't made here, it's just a matter of time before he gets to that. We saw how frustrated he was last year, and to go through another season under difficult circumstances with no real progress. And, when you get comments coming out of like Rasmus Dahlin saying they're embarrassed and things like, things are bad in Buffalo. I'm not really sure that I have a lot of confidence in Ralph Kruger as a coach either, but we will see. I mean, there just doesn't seem to be a lot of adaptation going on in the style of play that he's trying to implement with this team that just doesn't seem to really fit the roster. But obviously, Eichel might not be going anywhere just yet. I mean, that's, like I mentioned, every time we talk about Eichel, we don't have any reason to think that a trade's been requested, and we are not saying it's going to happen, but clearly we're talking about teams that are reportedly showing interest. So on the side of Taylor Hall, the reason I wanted to link him here to this conversation, Elliot Friedman's recently made mention on Sportsnet about when he feels the Maple Leafs are likely going to be making a trade. He feels there's a good opportunity here coming up in their schedule where they have an extended time off, where they only have a short number of games over a couple of weeks span, and clearly that's a good opportunity for them to make an acquisition. It's a good opportunity for them to bring somebody in if they have to quarantine. They wouldn't have to miss as much time. Now, of course, the Canadian teams that bring in players from the U.S., it's tough. We just saw the Ryan Dzingel join the Ottawa Senators finally after 2 weeks of quarantine and 3 or 4 days of skating before he get up to par. That's a long time to wait to get your player in the lineup. And if you don't make that deal until the deadline, you're not going to have much time to get any games in before the season's over and the playoffs get underway. So obviously, he feels that the Leafs are going after a top 6 forward at the NHL trade deadline. Of course, the Sabres are not in a good spot. Many feel that even though Taylor Hall said all the right things and has indicated he's willing to entertain an extension, that the Sabres will basically trade him. They could consider talking to him again as a free agent in the offseason if they really want to. I really don't see Taylor Hall signing an extension beforehand. That's not his style anyway, especially with his agent, regardless of where the team is at. So therefore, I do think that there's a really high chance Taylor Hall is moved at the deadline or beforehand to go on to another team for a potential playoff run. And I know I've seen many people on social media linking the possibility that they feel Taylor Hall would be a good fit in Toronto. We know what the Leafs are likely going to do. We just don't know what player it's going to be. And based on what Friedman's saying, there's many that think maybe Taylor Hall could end up being their guy. So the fact that he fits the description on what the Leafs are likely going to want to add, we know that the likelihood of Hall being moved is high. Could there be a marriage between the two, and could we see Taylor Hall end up going to Toronto? Now, I don't have any direct sources or anything saying that the Leafs are definitely looking at Hall. That's not what we're saying here. We're just saying that two scenarios are lining up perfectly for a potential match, and I want to get your opinions on it because I know there's a lot of chatter on social media around Hall maybe being the Leafs guy to add ahead of the deadline. Don't worry about the contract. Buffalo can retain a bunch of that salary, and of course at the deadline, they can move some money around here to likely make it work. I know they could do it when it comes to a cap perspective. They have a lot of young assets now that Buffalo might find intriguing, and I can see there being a deal to be worked out if they want to go down that road. So let me know what you think. Do you see Taylor Hall being a potential fit for the Maple Leafs for a playoff run? I don't see him sticking around in Toronto long term after that, regardless of how it works out, because they're going to have a really hard time to sign him to any kind of longer term deal given their cap constraints. But I can see how it could work on a short term basis as they try to go all in here and really make a run for the Stanley Cup this year. I mean, I've heard people say, including Elliot Friedman, and after those 3 games against the Oilers where they dominated them, they really feel like they can win this North Division and get to the Final Four. And then, as they say, anything can happen. And I do think the Leafs would be competitive enough to at least give those other teams a run. So this very well could be the year that they might have their best shot at winning or at least going far to get a Stanley Cup before things kind of reset and start to go back to normal next year and beyond. So let me know your thoughts down in the comments and we'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content, and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.